This is my review of the Rival RS100 professional sparring gloves. I got these in the blue and silver colorway in 18 ounce. Now, first of all, let me talk about the things I like when it comes to these gloves. And there's quite a few things that I like. Right off the bat, they are a very pretty looking pair of gloves, at least for me anyway. I'm not somebody who cares that much about aesthetics of a glove. I'm more about the functionality. But for whatever it's worth, I personally think these are among the nicest looking pair of sparring gloves I've actually ever owned. So that's definitely a plus for them. You know, I like the rubberized badge that they've got on the wrist there, and just the overall design, the graphics, the colorway, etc. Very pretty looking pair of boxing gloves. You can see there on the face of the glove, you know, same way. Very pretty looking pair of gloves. So putting the gloves on right away, you can make an excellent fist. They feel very comfortable. At least they did for me. The fist position is excellent. They are, you know, they have something called ergonomic true fist construction. I guess that's just you know, Rival's marketing in terms of the cut of this particular glove. They've decided to call it ergonomic true fist, but it is a very comfortable glove. They do put your fist in a good position. When you hit the bag or the pads or another person, you feel like you're hitting with the knuckles flush. In fact, I would say out of all Rival's gloves, these put your fist in the best position, okay? Very much like a fight glove in terms of the fist position. And in fact, these feel more, in terms of the shape and the fit, they feel more like the Guerrero fight gloves than the Guerrero sparring gloves do. And I know that sounds very strange, okay? Because the Guerrero sparring gloves are supposed to be just a sized up version of their fight gloves. But I find that these, the RS100s, actually feel more like the Guerrero fight gloves than the Guerrero sparring gloves do, which is strange. You can open your hand very easily in this pair of gloves, no problem at all. You can open them. You might notice that there is some discoloration on these gloves because I have been using them quite heavily, and I'm not someone who's, you know, overly precious about my gloves. So, you know, when they do get dirt and grime and blood on them, I'm not always the person to be cleaning them after every single session. So they are a little dirty. I've been using them quite a lot, but you can open your hand very, very easily. As I say, the fist position is great. Aesthetically, a nice looking pair of gloves. I do wish that the laces were a little bit longer, but that's, you know, not really a massive big deal. Once you cinch them up tight by the person who's tying your gloves up, there should be, you know, adequate lace, because I haven't put them on. I haven't tightened the laces particularly right now, because obviously I'm having to put these on myself for this review. So yeah, the laces could be a little longer, but most people will find them okay. Yeah, those are the good points of these gloves. The aesthetics are great. They feel good when you're hitting things. You can make a great fist. You can open and close your hand very easily. But now to the negatives, and there are quite a few negatives with these gloves. Now, if it wasn't for the negatives I'm about to talk about, these would be by far my favorite Rival sparring gloves. And I do like the RS1s. I think they're great gloves, but these gloves allow you to open your hand easier, which is not something that's essential for me, but it is, you know, nice to have, because it's like a fight glove. On most fight gloves, you can open and close your hand very easily. So you can open and close your hands easier on these than you can with the RS1 Rival sparring gloves. And for me, these have got a flatter punch surface than the RS1s. So I find that I connect on the bag and the pads and on opponents better and more flush in these gloves than I do in the RS1s. In fact, let me just bring the RS1s in a second. All right, so there's the RS1s, the black ones, next to the RS100s. And you can see a comparison. They're both 18-ounce gloves. The RS100s are a bigger glove in terms of, you know, the dimensions, but they apparently weigh both the same. They're both 18-ounce gloves. The thickness of the padding is similar. And as I say, with the RS1s, it's got a flatter punch surface. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see particularly well in this video, but if you try them on for yourselves and you're hitting the bag for yourselves, comparing these two pairs of sparring gloves, you'll definitely find that with the RS100s, these blue gloves, you hit the bag and the pads a bit more flush than you do with the black gloves here, the RS1s. So not to say the RS1s are bad gloves at all, they're not, they're great gloves, but yeah, you do tend to hit a bit more flush with the RS1s, at least I do anyway. The fist position is a bit better, on the RS100s than it is on the RS1s. The RS1s are the black, the RS100s are the blue. So yeah, RS100s, bit better fist position, and you punch a bit more flush, and you can open and close your hand a bit better. So, like I said, I would personally say that these would have been my favorite rival sparring gloves by far if it wasn't for these few flaws that they have. And to me, they're quite significant flaws. The first flaw is that these gloves are not actually made out of leather. They are made out of what Rival call super rich microfiber PU. Okay. Now, Rival say that this material is more durable than leather. Well, it might be more durable than leather, but what I can tell you is that it's not as porous as leather and it's not as flexible as leather. And so that presents two problems. Firstly, the padding in these gloves is very, very dense, very stiff, very hard padding. Now, when you have the gloves made out of leather, when you make a tight fist, it pulls the leather tight over the padding, okay, on the knuckle. But the leather has a little bit of give in it. Leather is slightly flexible. So basically, when you make a fist in a pair of leather gloves, the padding doesn't get as compressed underneath because the leather has a bit of stretch in it, okay, if that makes sense. But whereas with these gloves, they're made out of this synthetic material, which is much stiffer than leather, and it doesn't have the give in it. And therefore, when you make a fist, and the padding is already stiff as it is, when you make a fist, the padding literally feels like rock. It feels rock hard when you make a fist in these gloves. And if you're going to be doing lots and lots of rounds of sparring in a pair of gloves that are this hard, and Rival do recommend that you break these gloves in on the pads or in a bag for like 20 rounds. Listen, I've done probably 100 rounds in these gloves, and even now they're not particularly soft. They're still a very stiff pair of boxing gloves. And I just feel like if they were made out of leather, that little bit of stretch that leather gives would have, made them a little bit more forgiving in terms of how hard the gloves feel. And for me personally, I would not recommend any serious punchers to be wearing these gloves in sparring. Okay, if you're somebody who's not a particularly big puncher, then maybe, you go ahead and use these gloves. But if you're someone who really, really hits extremely hard, I wouldn't recommend you be sparring in these gloves because they're just too hard. You're going to be doing far too much damage to your sparring partners. At the end of the day, sparring is about learning. And of course, you want sparring to simulate an actual fight. But because you're going to be doing so many rounds, you don't want to be, damaging your sparring partners as much as you'd be damaging your opponent in the actual fight. Okay, so anybody who hits really hard, I would not recommend these gloves for sparring. For using the bag and hitting the pads, that's fine. But for actually sparring, I personally wouldn't recommend them. The foam in them is far too dense and stiff to be sparring with them, in my opinion, if you really, really hit hard. Again, if you're somebody who don't hit as hard, maybe you'll get away with them. All right. And again, this synthetic leather material never really breaks in to the point that it becomes as supple as leather. It's always a little bit stiff. So if I was to give some feedback, some constructive criticism to Rival, I would say if you're going to continue producing these gloves in this synthetic leather material, you need to go with a softer foam. Yeah, I'm not saying it has to be like a pillow, but you need to go with softer foam to compensate for the fact that this synthetic material doesn't have the stretch in it that leather does. So when you make a fist, you've really got an extremely hard punching surface, and I really wouldn't recommend that for, big guys, heavyweights, people who hit really hard. you're going to be mashing up your sparring partners. And if you're the one on the other end of these gloves, you're going to be getting mashed up too, more so than you need to be when you're doing dozens or maybe hundreds of rounds of sparring for a particular fight. So, and the other issue with this synthetic material is that it's not porous. It's certainly not as porous as real leather. And therefore, these gloves do smell quite bad. And the ventilation in these gloves isn't as good as leather because, as I say, leather is porous. So moisture can escape from leather a lot more easily than it can escape from this synthetic material. And I use sometimes these gloves and leather gloves in the same session. I'll maybe do like, 6 to 8 rounds in these and 6 to 8 rounds in another pair of gloves. And I bring them home, and the leather gloves dry out far quicker than these gloves do. These gloves take much longer to dry out, and they do end up smelling quite bad. This mesh material that they have on the palm, you can see it's a bit discolored there from all the use. That mesh material doesn't do a particularly good job at ventilating these gloves and getting them dry. So they do end up smelling. And, I've had to spray all kind of stuff up in there, like a shoe deodorizer and stuff like that to combat the smell of these gloves. So for me, that is 2 critical flaws that these gloves have. Okay. The fact that the synthetic leather is not very stretchy, it's not very pliable, it doesn't have much give in it. And the fact that it's not porous, so the gloves do end up smelling quite bad. And the fact that the foam combined with the synthetic leather makes for a glove which is far too stiff, in my opinion, to be sparring in. Unless you're going to be going really easy and doing maybe technical sparring. And I'm talking about if you're a big guy, like me, I'm a heavyweight. If you're a heavyweight or you're any kind of serious puncher, I wouldn't recommend using these gloves in sparring. I really wouldn't. And I think it's disappointing, really, because there are so many good points to these gloves. There are so many things I like about them. I just wish Rival made them in leather, including the mesh area on the palm. Make a leather version. I'm not saying that they should discontinue these gloves in the synthetic material. No, you can keep the synthetic version. But what I will say, for the synthetic version, use a softer foam. For a leather version, they're going to be a lot more expensive, but people are going to pay the extra money because I do think the shape of the glove is fantastic. I love the shape of these gloves. I love the way they fit. I love the way they feel. I think the thumb placement is excellent. The thumb feels very comfortable. It's a long thumb, so you're not going to be stubbing your thumb on the inside of these gloves when you're hitting the bag or anything like that. The thumb does feel very roomy and spacious. Definitely a more comfortable thumb than on the RS1s. And not that the RS1s are uncomfortable, but these are just more comfortable than the RS1s. They've got a longer thumb in them. And for me, these are more comfortable even and actually nicer to use than the Guerreros. Yeah, I like the Guerreros, but for me, the fist placement on these, the RS100s, is better. I feel like I'm hitting the target a lot more flush in these than I do in the Guerreros. And I can open my hand easier in these than I can in the Guerreros. But as I say, the synthetic leather combined with a very stiff foam, for me, is a critical flaw. And for that reason, I couldn't recommend these gloves for most people when it comes to, I couldn't recommend these gloves for maybe most heavyweights or most serious punchers. But if you're someone who's just going to do technical sparring or someone who doesn't hit that hard, then maybe these gloves would be okay for you. So yeah, that's my review of the Rival RS100 professional sparring gloves. I wanted to really love these gloves, and they're nearly my favorite Rival gloves if it wasn't for the material that Rival chose to make them out of. If Rival do a leather version of these gloves and charge $400 for them, I'll buy a pair, right? That's how much I like the shape and the functionality of them. But as I say, the fact that they're so hard, these gloves, and the synthetic material just isn't very porous or stretchy, so they end up smelling bad, and so on and so forth. So that's my review. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully it's given you some kind of insight and some kind of guide as to whether or not you should be buying this particular pair of gloves. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'm out.